Ms. Ashley Sinclair, you have exactly 47 seconds to decide whether you want to save your father's life or prefer to see him waste away in a prison cell for the next 20 years. Ashley blinked slowly, as if she could wake up from this nightmare at any moment. The man in front of her didn't seem real. Tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary as a dance teacher, and with an expression so cold it could freeze hell itself. His emerald green eyes analyzed her as if she were a particularly uninteresting insect. "I'm sorry, What?" she stammered, gripping the strap of her vintage purse until her knuckles turned white. Thomas Blackwood, because of course he had a pompous name like that, sighed with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a particularly slow child. "Your father, Gerald Sinclair, owes me $3.5 million, money that he, let's say, inappropriately redirected from my company." He adjusted his shirt cuffs with precise movements. "Normally I would simply turn him over to the authorities and move on with my life, but it happens that I need a wife." "A wife?" Ashley repeated, feeling like she was in one of those awful TV pranks. "Are you asking for my hand in marriage?" "God forbid." The answer came so quick and sharp that she almost choked. "I'm offering a business deal. You pretend to be my wife for exactly 12 months. I forgive your father's debt and even pay your expenses during that period. Refuse my proposal." He shrugged with studied elegance. "Well, I hope you enjoy prison visits." Ashley's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. 3 weeks ago, she was only worried about her dance school's year-end presentation. Now she discovered that her father, the sweet, absent-minded man who raised birds in the backyard and always forgot to pay bills on time, was apparently a criminal. "Why me?" she asked, her voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. "Convenience." Thomas consulted a watch that was probably worth more than her car. "You're presentable enough to fool my grandmother, but not so flashy as to arouse suspicion. Besides," he examined her from head to toe with the same expression he'd used to evaluate used furniture, "it's obvious you need the money." Ashley looked down, seeing for the first time how she must appear to his eyes. Floral dress bought on clearance, shoes mended by the neighborhood cobbler, purse that was her grandmother's inheritance, in stark contrast to the office where they were, all glass, brushed steel, and artwork she only saw in museums. "And if I accept," she swallowed hard, "what exactly would this charade involve? Residing in my house, attending social events at my side, behaving like a devoted wife when necessary." He paused, and for the first time since she'd entered that top-floor office, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Oh, and there will be a contract, quite detailed." "Naturally," she murmured. Thomas opened a drawer and pulled out a leather folder. 150 pages specifying every aspect of our agreement, from the monthly budget for your wardrobe to the conditions for divorce at the end of the period. Ashley took the folder with trembling hands. The first lines she managed to focus on were a list of appropriate behaviors in public that included items like smile, but never laugh out loud, and conversation limited to previously approved topics. "This is insane," she breathed. "It's business," he corrected, "and your only alternative to seeing your father in jail." The silence stretched between them like an abyss. Ashley thought of her father that morning, feeding the birds in the backyard while humming an old Beatles song. She thought of the tears in his eyes when he confessed what he had done, how he tried to save the house after she lost her job at the conservatory, how everything got out of control. When would you need an answer? Now. Thomas crossed his arms. "My grandmother arrives from Paris next week to meet my new wife. We have to be married by then." "Really married?" Ashley felt the world spinning. "Obviously. Loretta Blackwood didn't reach 92 by being easily fooled. The marriage will be real but completely platonic, of course." He said this last part, as if the idea of touching her was physically repulsive. How charming. Ashley closed her eyes for a moment, seeing her father's face. Gerald Sinclair, the man who taught her to dance in the kitchen using his feet as shoes when she was 5, who worked 3 jobs to pay for her ballet lessons, who never lost faith in her, even when everyone else said she was too old, too short, didn't have the right type to be a professional ballerina. "I accept." The words came out before she could stop them. Thomas nodded as if he had never doubted the answer. "Perfect. My assistant will accompany you to the boutique tomorrow to arrange a suitable wardrobe. We'll marry on Friday." "Friday?" she squeaked. "That's in 3 days. Efficiency, Ms. Sinclair. It's what separates successful people from, he gestured vaguely in her direction, people who aren't. Ashley took a deep breath, counting to 10, then to 20. Then she imagined several creative ways to use her dance skills to cause significant bodily harm to an arrogant CEO. There's one more thing, Thomas said, walking to the panoramic window that offered a stunning view of the city. During this year, you will be Ashley Blackwood. And Ashley Blackwood is not a suburban dance teacher. She is sophisticated, cultured, and certainly doesn't contradict her husband in public. I understand. Ashley stood up, holding the folder against her chest like a shield. Any other personality transformations you'd like to demand? Perhaps I could learn not to breathe too loudly as well. For a split second, she swore she saw his lips twitch in an almost expression of amusement. But when he turned around, his face was as impassive as before. My driver will take you home. I suggest you use the time to say goodbye to your former life. He returned to his desk, already dismissing her from his attention. Oh, and Miss Sinclair, don't disappoint me. As Ashley was escorted out of that cold office, a single certainty pulsed in her mind. The next 12 months would be the longest of her life, or the most surprising, because as much as Thomas Blackwood was cold, arrogant, and completely insufferable, there was something in his eyes, a flash of vulnerability he thought he had hidden, that suggested that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than that icy facade. But that was just wishful thinking, right? Right? Absolutely not. Ashley stared at her reflection in the three-way mirror, feeling like she was wearing a costume for a play she never auditioned for. The emerald silk dress clung to her curves in ways that made her want to hide behind a curtain, and the price tag dangling from the sleeve showed more zeros than her last 3 paychecks combined. But Ms. Blackwood, the boutique assistant Marcel, practically purred. It brings out your eyes magnificently. Mr. Blackwood specifically requested. I don't care what Mr. Blackwood requested. Ashley tugged at the plunging neckline. I look like I'm auditioning for a role in a soap opera. A very expensive, very inappropriate soap opera. Marcel exchanged a meaningful glance with Thomas's assistant, Helena, who had been sitting in the corner like a well-dressed hawk, monitoring every decision with military precision. Perhaps we could try the Navy Valentino, Helena suggested, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of managing a billionaire's life. It's more conservative. 3 hours. They'd been at this for 3 hours, and Ashley felt like Alice tumbling deeper down the rabbit hole. Yesterday she was debating whether she could afford the name-brand cereal at the grocery store. Today, she was rejecting dresses that cost more than most people's cars. This is ridiculous, she muttered, stepping off the platform. I'm a dance teacher, not a whatever Thomas Blackwood's wife is supposed to be. You're about to be Mrs. Thomas Blackwood, Helena corrected smoothly. And Mrs. Blackwood has certain standards to maintain. Ashley caught sight of herself in another mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. They'd already been to the salon, where a team of stylists had transformed her shoulder-length brown waves into a sleek, sophisticated bob that probably required a manual to maintain. Her eyebrows had been sculpted, which felt like medieval torture, her skin perfected with treatments she couldn't pronounce, and her nails painted in something called nude sophistication. She looked expensive, polished, nothing like herself. I need some air, she announced, grabbing her old purse, the one Helena kept eyeing like it was carrying a contagious disease. Miss Sinclair, we still have shoes, accessories, and undergarments. Air. Now. Ashley pushed through the boutique's heavy glass doors and onto the sidewalk, gulping the city air like she'd been drowning. The late afternoon sun felt warm on her face, a sharp contrast to the ice-cold air conditioning inside that had made her shiver for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. Her phone buzzed. Dad, how's my girl doing? Gerald's voice was warm and familiar, a lifeline to her real world. She looked back at the boutique, where she could see Helena and Marcel gesturing frantically through the window. I'm buying clothes that cost more than our mortgage. Ashley, honey, you don't have to do this. We'll figure something else out, I promise. The thing was, they both knew there wasn't another way out. Ashley had spent the previous night researching Thomas Blackwood online, and what she'd found had only confirmed her suspicions. This man didn't make empty threats. He was ruthless in business, had a reputation for destroying competitors who crossed him, and according to one particularly colorful article, had once bought out an entire company just to fire one employee who had leaked confidential information. "Dad, it's just for a year," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. "And who knows, maybe it won't be as bad as I think. That's my optimistic girl." She could practically hear him smiling. "Just remember, no matter how fancy you get, you're still the little girl who used to dance on my feet in the kitchen." After hanging up, Ashley stood there for a moment, watching the world go by. Normal people living normal lives, worried about normal things like traffic and dinner plans, and whether they remembered to DVR their favorite show. Escaping already? Ashley spun around to find Thomas Blackwood himself approaching, looking like he'd stepped off the pages of a men's fashion magazine. Even his casual Friday look, dark jeans and a white button-down, probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. "Just getting some air," she said, hating how defensive she sounded. "Your shopping Gestapo in there is quite thorough." "Helena is efficient," he agreed, stopping beside her. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her think of stormy nights and whispered secrets. "I take it the transformation isn't going smoothly?" "Transformation?" Ashley laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call completely erasing who someone is?" Thomas studied her with those sharp green eyes. "I call it adaptation. In my world, appearance matters. First impressions, social cues, the ability to fit in seamlessly. These things can make or break business deals worth millions. And I'm just another business deal to you." It wasn't a question, but something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "You're a temporary solution to a problem," he said carefully. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Right." Ashley turned back toward the boutique, then paused. "Can I ask you something? Why do you need a wife so badly that you'd blackmail a complete stranger into marrying you?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "My grandmother is dying." The simple words hit Ashley like a physical blow. Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. "She's 92, Thomas continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less, and her dying wish is to see me settled and happy before she goes." "Thomas, I don't want your sympathy," he cut her off sharply. "I want your compliance with our agreement. Can you do that?" Ashley looked at him, really looked, and for just a second, she saw past the expensive clothes and cold demeanor to something raw and vulnerable underneath. This wasn't just about business or control or even his grandmother's dying wish. This was about a man who'd built walls so high around himself that he'd forgotten how to let anyone in, even someone who was trying to help him. "Yes," she said softly, "I can do that." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle she almost missed it. "Good." He glanced at his watch. "Helena has instructions to have you ready by tomorrow at 4. We have dinner with my grandmother's lawyer to discuss the logistics of our situation." "What kind of logistics?" "The kind that will determine whether she believes our marriage is real." Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade. "I hope you're a better actress than you are a negotiator, Ashley. Because if Loretta Blackwood suspects this is fake, the deal is off." As he walked away, Ashley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Tomorrow, the real performance would begin. And suddenly, she wasn't sure who was supposed to be fooling whom. "Remember, you've been madly in love since college. You met at a charity gala, and your favorite shared memory is the trip to Tuscany last spring." Ashley stared at Helena in disbelief. "But I've never been to Tuscany. I've barely been out of the state." "You have now," Helena replied crisply, handing her a tablet filled with photos of scenic Italian vineyards. "Study these. Mr. Richardson will ask questions." They were sitting in the back of Thomas's sleek black car, heading toward the most expensive restaurant in the city for dinner with his grandmother's lawyer. Ashley felt like she was cramming for the most important exam of her life, except failure meant her father going to prison. What if he asked something specific, like what wine we had or which hotel we stayed at? "The Villa San Michele in Fiesole, Brunello di Montalcino, 2015. You found it a bit too bold but pretended to love it because Thomas enjoyed it so much." Helena's voice was robotic, like she was reading from a script. "Romance is in the details, Ms. Sinclair." Ashley's stomach churned. This is insane. No one's going to believe. The car door opened, and Thomas slid in beside her, bringing with him that intoxicating scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her rent, and when he glanced at her, She caught a flicker of surprise. "You look—" He paused, his eyes taking in the navy Valentino dress they'd finally agreed on, the way it hugged her curves without being too revealing. "Appropriate. Such poetry," Ashley muttered. "Be still, my beating heart." Helena cleared her throat meaningfully. "Perhaps you should practice some affection? Mr.
Richardson has known you're a child. He'll be watching." "Affection," Thomas. "Right." The silence stretched awkward till Ashley finally. "This is going disaster." "Not if you follow the script." Thomas tighter. The script made us sound like robot. Ashley turned to.
"Look, I know I'm not sophisticated or polished or whatever it is you actually need in a fake wife, but even I know that real couples don't talk like corporate press releases." "Then what do you suggest?" Ashley bit her lip, thinking. "Real couples have, I don't know, inside jokes, little moments. They know things about each other that no one else does. Such as, she gestured helplessly. "You hate mushrooms, but you're too polite to send back food in restaurants, so you just pick them off when you think no one's looking." Thomas stared at her. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because yesterday at lunch, you did exactly that with your salad." Ashley felt heat creep up her neck. "I notice things. It's a teacher thing." Something shifted in Thomas's expression. "What else have you noticed?" "You tap your left ring finger when you're thinking. You take your coffee black, but you stir it anyway. And you have a small scar on your chin that you probably got as a kid. But you've gotten very good at making people not notice it." The car had gone completely silent. Even Helena had stopped typing on her ever-present tablet. "Fascinating," Thomas said quietly. "And what should I know about you that would convince Richardson we're desperately in love?" Ashley's heart did a little flip at the way he said, "desperately in love," even though she knew he was just playing his part. I talk to myself when I'm nervous. I can't sleep without at least one window cracked open, even in winter. And I have this weird habit of rearranging things when I'm stressed. Books, papers, whatever's nearby." "Is that why you've reorganized my entire contract folder 3 times since we got in the car?" Ashley looked down and realized she had indeed been unconsciously sorting the papers by size. "Oh, sorry. Don't apologize." Thomas reached over and gently stilled her hands with his. The touch was electric, sending little sparks up her arms. "It's endearing." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Ashley was acutely aware of his hands covering hers, warm and surprisingly gentle. His eyes had gone soft, and she found herself wondering what it would be like if this were real, if Thomas Blackwood actually looked at her like she was someone worth cherishing instead of just a convenient solution to his problem. Helena cleared her throat again. "We're here." The restaurant was the kind of place Ashley had only seen in movies, all crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations, where the waiters moved like dancers, and the wine list probably cost more than her car. Thomas guided her inside with his hand on the small of her back, a gesture so natural she almost forgot it was fake. "Thomas, my boy," a distinguished man in his 70s rose from a corner table, his smile genuine and warm. This was clearly someone who had known Thomas for years, who remembered him as more than just a ruthless CEO. "Uncle David," Thomas smiled back, and Ashley was startled by how different he looked when the expression was real. Younger, somehow, almost boyish. "I'd like you to meet Ashley." "Ah, the mysterious fiancé we've heard so much about." David Richardson took her hand with old-world courtesy. "Loretta has been beside herself with excitement. She was beginning to think this one would remain a bachelor forever." "Not much chance of that," Ashley said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Thomas is far too wonderful to stay single long." She felt Thomas's start of surprise beside her, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her with something that almost looked like admiration. "And how did you two meet?" David asked as they sat down. "Loretta made me promise to get all the details." Ashley's mind went blank. College? Charity gala? What had Helena said? "Actually," Thomas said smoothly, "it was at a coffee shop." "A coffee shop?" David raised an eyebrow. "Ashley was reorganizing the sugar packets," Thomas continued, and there was genuine warmth in his voice now. "And I was fascinated by her systematic approach to chaos management." Ashley nearly choked on her water. "He was staring," she added, falling into the story. "I thought he was judging my neurotic tendencies." "I was," Thomas admitted with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "But I found them irresistibly charming." The lies flowed easier after that, building on the foundation of tiny truths they'd shared in the car. David asked about their first date, the bookstore where Ashley rearranged an entire shelf while Thomas bought her coffee. Their proposal. Thomas had hidden the ring among her perfectly organized dance studio supplies. Their plans for the future, carefully vague but sweetly romantic. By the time dessert arrived, Ashley had almost forgotten they were acting. Thomas was being, well, charming, attentive. He remembered details from their made-up stories, asked her opinions, even laughed at her terrible jokes. And when he looked at her, just for moments here and there, she could almost believe the affection in his eyes was real. "You'll make Loretta very happy," David said as they prepared to leave. "She's been worried about Thomas for years, afraid he was married to his work instead of finding someone who could match his heart." "Someone who could match his heart," Ashley repeated softly as they walked back to the car. "We did well," Thomas said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Richardson believed us completely." "Yes," Ashley agreed, though something felt hollow about the victory. Mission accomplished, but as Thomas held the car door open for her, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere between the coffee shop story and the fake proposal, the line between performance and reality had become dangerously blurred. And judging by the way Thomas was carefully avoiding looking at her now, she wasn't the only one who had noticed. "This is not a house. This is a museum that someone accidentally left furniture in." Ashley stood in the marble foyer of Thomas's penthouse, her single suitcase looking embarrassingly small next to the towering arrangements of exotic flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything was pristine, white, chrome and glass, beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of any human warmth. "The guest suite is on the 3rd floor, Thomas said, not looking at her as he scrolled through emails on his phone. "Helena has already arranged for your belongings to be moved there." "Guest suite?" Ashley followed him up a sweeping staircase that belonged in a palace. "Aren't married couples supposed to, share a bedroom? What if someone sees?" "No one will see. I don't entertain guests in my private quarters." His tone was back to its usual ice-cold efficiency, nothing like the warm, charming man from dinner last night. "Besides, the arrangement is clearly outlined in the contract. Page 47, subsection 12. "Of course it is," Ashley muttered. "God forbid we leave anything to chance or, heaven forbid, human emotion." Thomas stopped so abruptly she almost crashed into his back. "Human emotion, Ms. Sinclair, is precisely what we're trying to avoid. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." The emphasis on business arrangement stung more than it should have. Ashley had spent the entire sleepless night replaying their dinner, remembering the way Thomas had looked at her when she talked about his coffee-stirring habit, the gentleness in his voice when he called her neuroses irresistibly charming. She'd almost convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, there had been something real in those moments. Apparently, she'd been deluding herself. "Right," she said coolly. "Wouldn't want to forget my place." Something flickered across Thomas's face, but before she could identify it, a new voice cut through the tension. "Thomas Matthew Blackwood, what in God's name is this I hear about a secret wedding?" They both turned to see a tiny woman striding through the front door like she owned the place. Despite being in her 90s, Loretta Blackwood moved with the authority of someone accustomed to having the world rearrange itself around her whims. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her Chanel suit impeccable, and her blue eyes, so much like Thomas's it was startling, were blazing with indignation. "Grand-mère," Thomas said, and Ashley was amazed at how quickly his entire demeanor softened. "You weren't supposed to arrive until after you'd already married this poor girl without proper ceremony or family present." Loretta's French accent was slight but unmistakable. "Mon Dieu, Thomas, I raised you better than this." "We were planning a small ceremony," Ashley said quickly, stepping forward. "Nothing elaborate." Loretta's sharp gaze fixed on her, and Ashley felt like she was being examined under a microscope. "And you are the mysterious Ashley who has captured my grandson's heart?" "Yes, ma'am. Madame will suffice." But there was warmth in the correction. "Now, let me look at you properly." The next few minutes were excruciating as Loretta circled Ashley like a general inspecting troops, asking rapid-fire questions about her background, her family, her intentions regarding Thomas. Ashley answered as honestly as she could while sticking to their cover story, but she could feel sweat beading on her forehead under the scrutiny. "Your hands," Loretta said suddenly, catching Ashley's wrist. "These are working hands. What do you do?" "I teach dance," Ashley said, then caught Thomas's warning look. "I mean, I used to," Before we got engaged, I ran a small studio. Ah, a dancer. Loretta's face lit up. I was quite accomplished myself in my youth. Show me. I'm sorry? Show me. Dance. Here now. Loretta gestured to the vast empty space of the living room. If you truly love my grandson, you will want to share what you're passionate about with his family. Ashley looked around the sterile perfection of Thomas's home, then at Thomas himself, who looked like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. I don't think this is really the place. Nonsense. Loretta was already moving to an elaborate sound system that probably cost more than Ashley's car. Music makes any space suitable for dancing. Soft jazz filled the room, and suddenly Ashley was transported back to her tiny studio, to the place where she felt most like herself. Without really thinking about it, she began to move. Nothing elaborate, just a simple contemporary piece that flowed with the music, expressing the confusion and longing and frustration she'd been feeling but couldn't put into words. When the song ended, the silence was deafening. Ashley opened her eyes to find both Thomas and Loretta staring at her. Beautiful, Loretta breathed. Thomas, you didn't tell me she was an artist. Thomas seemed to have lost the ability to form complete sentences. This calls for champagne, Loretta declared. We must celebrate properly. And tomorrow, we plan a real wedding. None of this courthouse nonsense. Grandmère, that's not necessary. It is absolutely necessary. Loretta's tone brooked no argument. The Blackwood name deserves better than a hasty elopement. We will have flowers, music, proper vows, the works. Ashley's heart sank. A real wedding, with vows and flowers and the pretense of love, felt like a cruel mockery. Bad enough that she was lying to this sweet old woman. Worse that she was starting to wish the lies were true. I should go check on my room, she said quickly. Get settled in. Your room? Loretta's eyebrows shot up. Surely you mean your and Thomas's room? The silence that followed was so charged, Ashley was surprised the lights didn't flicker. We thought separate rooms might be more proper, Thomas said carefully. With you visiting. Loretta laughed, a sound like silver bells. My dear boy, I am 92 years old. I think I can handle the reality of married couples sharing a bed. Her expression grew shrewd. Unless there's some other reason you're avoiding intimacy? No, Ashley said quickly. At the same time, Thomas said, Of course not. Excellent. Then Thomas can move his things to the guest room, and Ashley can take the master suite. A bride should have the most beautiful space in the house. And with that pronouncement, she swept out of the room, leaving Ashley and Thomas staring at each other in horror. This is a disaster, Thomas said finally. She's going to figure it out, Ashley agreed. She's too smart, too observant. Did you see the way she looked at us? Like she could see right through our performance. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, messing up its perfect styling. We need to be more convincing. More convincing how? You can barely stand to be in the same room as me when we're not performing for an audience. That's not. Thomas stopped himself. This is about the contract, the arrangement, nothing more. But even as he said it, Ashley caught him looking at her the way he had when she was dancing, like he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. Right, she said softly. The arrangement. As she headed upstairs to what was now apparently her temporary home, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed walls were starting to crumble, and she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her more. Ashley woke up to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen, followed by a string of creative cursing that would have made her dance students blush. Glancing at the clock, 6:47 a.m., she groaned and padded downstairs in her oversized pajamas and fuzzy slippers, following the scent of burning something. She found Thomas standing in his pristine kitchen, staring at what appeared to be the remains of an exploded coffee machine. He was already dressed in a perfectly pressed shirt and tie, but his hair was disheveled, and there was a suspicious dark stain on his sleeve. Let me guess, Ashley said, leaning against the doorframe. The machine didn't read the manual? Thomas whirled around, and she noticed his eyes looked tired, like he'd gotten about as much sleep as she had. I was trying to make coffee. It seems to have disagreed with me. When was the last time you actually made your own coffee? Define made. Ashley laughed, despite herself. That's what I thought. As she moved past him to survey the damage, very aware of how his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of burnt coffee and how the kitchen suddenly felt much smaller with both of them in it. I have people for this, Thomas said defensively. Well, your people aren't here, and unless you want to explain to Loretta why you can't perform basic human functions. Ashley started opening cabinets, looking for supplies. Step aside, billionaire boy. Let a normal person handle this. I'm perfectly capable of... Thomas. She turned to face him, and something in her voice made him stop mid-sentence. It's okay to not be perfect at everything. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then quietly, I don't know how to not be perfect. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way that made Ashley's chest tight. This wasn't the cold, controlled CEO from their first meeting. This was just a man who'd been carrying the weight of impossible expectations for so long, he'd forgotten how to set them down. Well, she said gently, lucky for you, I'm an excellent teacher. What followed was possibly the most domestic 20 minutes of Thomas Blackwood's adult life. Ashley showed him how to measure coffee grounds, how to wait for the perfect temperature, how to clean up as he went instead of leaving destruction in his wake. She stood close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something light and floral that was nothing like the expensive perfumes he was used to. And when she guided his hands to show him the proper technique, he forgot how to breathe properly. See? Ashley said as they watched the coffee maker do its job without exploding. Simple. Simple, Thomas repeated, though he was looking at her instead of the machine. Good morning, mes chéris. They jumped apart like guilty teenagers as Loretta swept into the kitchen, perfectly dressed despite the early hour. Her knowing smile suggested she'd seen much more than they'd intended. Grand-mère, Thomas said, his voice slightly strangled. You're up early. Jet lag, darling. And the wonderful smell of... Is that coffee? Loretta's eyes twinkled with mischief. How domestic. Ashley, I see you're already training my grandson in the art of being a proper husband. I was just helping with the machine, Ashley said quickly, her cheeks burning. Of course you were. Loretta settled herself at the breakfast bar with the air of someone preparing to be thoroughly entertained. Thomas, dear, perhaps you could make coffee for all of us. Practice makes perfect, after all. The next few minutes were a comedy of errors, as Thomas, clearly nervous under his grandmother's amused gaze, managed to spill grounds everywhere, nearly burn himself on the machine, and somehow get coffee on the ceiling. Ashley found herself biting her lip to keep from laughing, while Loretta made encouraging comments in rapid French. Perhaps, Loretta said delicately, Ashley could assist? I've got it, Thomas said through gritted teeth, just as the machine made an ominous grinding sound. Thomas. Ashley moved to stand behind him, reaching around to guide his hands on the controls. Relax. It's just coffee, not a hostile takeover. She felt him tense as she pressed close, felt the way his breathing changed when her fingers covered his. For a moment that stretched too long, they stayed like that, her chest against his back, her hands over his, the scent of his cologne filling her senses. Better? She whispered. Much, he said, his voice rough. The coffee machine beeped cheerfully, and they sprang apart again, both of them looking anywhere but at each other. Magnifique! Loretta clapped her hands together. True love is knowing when to lead and when to follow, non? Ashley's heart did something complicated in her chest. True love. If only Loretta knew how far from the truth that was. Except, standing there in the morning light, watching Thomas smile with genuine pleasure at having successfully made coffee, Ashley wasn't sure anymore what was real and what was performance. So, Loretta said as they settled around the breakfast bar with their perfectly brewed coffee, tell me about your wedding plans. Our what? Ashley nearly choked on her drink. Your wedding, ma petite. The proper ceremony we discussed yesterday. Loretta pulled out her phone, which, Ashley noted with surprise, was the latest model despite her age. I've already called my event planner in the city. Marie-Claire is beside herself with excitement. Grand-mère, Thomas said carefully, that's really not necessary. Nonsense. A Blackwood wedding is always necessary. Loretta's tone brooked no argument. Besides, I may not have many chances left to see my family celebrate. The words hit like a physical blow. Ashley saw Thomas flinch, saw the way his jaw tightened with something that looked like pain. What were you thinking? Ashley asked softly. For the wedding? Loretta's face lit up. Something intimate but elegant. Perhaps the garden at the estate in the Hamptons. It's beautiful this time of year, and the roses are in full bloom. That sounds lovely, Ashley said, meaning it despite everything. We could have the ceremony at sunset with strings of lights in the trees. Oh, and dancing. There must be dancing. Loretta looked at Ashley with renewed excitement. After that beautiful performance yesterday, I insist you and Thomas have a proper first dance. Ashley's stomach dropped. Dancing with Thomas, in front of people, pretending to be in love. It sounded like the sweetest kind of torture. I should probably mention, Ashley said hesitantly, I don't really have family to invite. It would just be my father. Then we shall make him feel like royalty, Loretta declared. Family is not about blood alone, chérie. It is about who chooses to love you. The words hit Ashley unexpectedly hard. She glanced at Thomas and found him already looking at her, something unreadable in his expression. When? Thomas asked quietly. Next weekend, Loretta said cheerfully. No point in waiting when you're already madly in love, oui? After Loretta left to make calls to her army of wedding planners, Ashley and Thomas sat in the kitchen in stunned silence. A week, Ashley said finally. A week, Thomas agreed. Your grandmother is terrifying. She's the only family I have left. Thomas stared into his coffee cup. The only person who ever... He stopped himself. Ever what? Nothing. It doesn't matter. But Ashley had heard the longing in his voice, the same ache she recognized in herself, the need to be loved for who you were, not what you could provide or how well you could perform. Thomas, she said softly, what happens after? When the year is up and we get divorced? How are you going to explain that to her? Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, I'll figure it out when the time comes. And if she's... Ashley couldn't finish the sentence. Then at least she'll die believing I was happy. His voice was so quiet she almost missed it, that I was capable of being loved. Ashley's heart broke a little at the raw honesty in his words. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and covered his hand with hers. Thomas, you are capable of being loved. He looked up at her then, and for just a moment, his walls were completely down. In his eyes, she saw not the ruthless CEO or the perfect heir, but just a man who'd spent his whole life believing he wasn't worth loving unless he was useful. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric, until Thomas pulled his hand away. We should discuss logistics for the wedding, he said, his mask sliding back into place. Right, Ashley said, trying to ignore the way her hand felt cold without his warmth. Logistics. But as they bent their heads over wedding plans and guest lists, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something that felt dangerously real, and she was no longer sure that was entirely a bad thing. Stop fidgeting, chérie. You're going to wrinkle the silk. Ashley forced her hands to still, but her heart continued its frantic percussion against her ribs. Through the French doors of the bridal suite at the Hamptons estate, she could see guests gathering in the garden, an intimate crowd of Thomas's business associates, society friends, and a handful of people she didn't recognize but who all looked like they belonged in magazines. Her father sat in the front row, looking overwhelmed but proud in his rented tuxedo. Gerald Sinclair had arrived that morning with tears in his eyes and a bouquet of daisies from his garden. Because fancy flowers are nice, but these ones have love in them, he'd said, making Ashley cry all over her makeup. You look like a princess, Loretta said softly, adjusting the delicate veil that had belonged to Thomas's great-grandmother. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and French lace, somehow both classic and modern, and it fit Ashley like it had been made for her. Which, knowing Loretta's efficiency, it probably had been. I feel like a fraud, Ashley whispered. Loretta's hand stilled on the veil. Why, ma petite? Ashley met the older woman's eyes in the antique mirror. Because this isn't real. None of this is real. For a long moment, Loretta said nothing. Then, quietly, what is real, Ashley? The feelings in your heart? The way my grandson looks at you when he thinks no one is watching? The way you've brought laughter back into this family? Before Ashley could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Helena entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. It's time, she said simply. The walk down the rose-petal-strewn aisle felt like a dream, or perhaps a very elaborate, very expensive nightmare. Ashley's arm was linked through her father's, and she could feel him trembling slightly with emotion. The string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light that made the whole scene look like a fairy tale. And then she saw Thomas. He stood beneath an archway of white roses and trailing ivy, looking devastatingly handsome in his midnight blue tuxedo. But it wasn't his appearance that made her stumble slightly. It was the expression on his face. Gone was the cold, controlled mask she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he was looking at her like she was something precious, something miraculous, something worth every risk in the world. For a moment, Ashley forgot how to breathe. "Take care of her," Gerald whispered as he placed Ashley's hand in Thomas's, and there was something fierce and protective in his voice that made Thomas nod solemnly. "I will, sir." The officiant, a distinguished older man who'd apparently married 3 generations of Blackwoods, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. Ashley tried to focus on the script they'd rehearsed, on the carefully crafted vows that Helena had written, but all she could think about was the way Thomas's thumb was gently stroking across her knuckles. "Thomas," the officiant said, "do you take Ashley to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Thomas's eyes never left Ashley's face. "I do." The words were simple, traditional, the same ones spoken at thousands of weddings. But the way Thomas said them, with a conviction that seemed to surprise even him, made Ashley's heart skip several beats. "Ashley, do you take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Ashley opened her mouth to deliver her practiced response, but the words that came out weren't the ones they'd rehearsed. "I do," she said, and meant it with the intensity that terrified her. The ring exchange was supposed to be perfunctory, simple platinum bands that matched their fake story. But when Thomas slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were shaking slightly, and when she did the same for him, she noticed he closed his eyes for just a moment, like he was making a wish. "You may kiss the bride." This was the moment Ashley had been dreading. They'd discussed it, of course, a brief, chaste kiss for appearances, nothing more. But as Thomas stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her knees weak, Ashley forgot every rational thought she'd ever had. The kiss started soft, almost hesitant, like Thomas was asking permission. But when Ashley's hands fisted in his lapels and she kissed him back, something ignited between them. It was supposed to be fake, but it felt like the most real thing that had ever happened to her. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Thomas's eyes held a confusion that probably matched her own. The guests erupted in applause, breaking the spell, and Ashley felt heat flood her cheeks as she remembered they had an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced with obvious pleasure, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Blackwood." The reception was a blur of congratulations, champagne, and small talk, with people whose names Ashley immediately forgot. She and Thomas moved through it like accomplished dancers, playing their parts perfectly. The devoted newlyweds who couldn't keep their hands off each other. Except it didn't feel like playing anymore. When Thomas's hand rested on her lower back as they mingled, when he leaned down to whisper in her ear during dinner, when he smiled at something she said, and his whole face transformed, none of it felt calculated or performed. It felt natural, like this was who they were supposed to be. "Time for the first dance," Loretta announced as the sun began to set, and Ashley's stomach dropped. The band struck up a soft, romantic melody as Thomas led her to the makeshift dance floor. The other guests formed a circle around them, watching expectantly, but Ashley was only aware of Thomas's hands, one on her waist, the other holding hers with infinite care. "I should probably mention," Thomas said quietly as they began to move, "I don't really know how to dance. Just follow my lead," Ashley whispered back, and was rewarded with one of his rare, genuine smiles. They moved together like they'd been dancing for years, Thomas letting Ashley guide him through the steps while somehow still managing to lead, their bodies finding a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Other couples gradually joined them on the dance floor, but Ashley barely noticed. In that moment, with Thomas's eyes locked on hers and his hands warm and sure, the rest of the world faded away. "Ashley," he said softly, and there was something in his voice she'd never heard before. "Thomas." For a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something important, something that might change everything between them. But then the song ended, and the spell was broken by applause and laughter and someone calling for cake. It wasn't until much later, after the last guest had gone home, and they were cleaning up in comfortable silence, that Ashley realized she was still wearing her wedding dress, and Thomas was still in his tuxedo, and neither of them had made any move to change. "Thank you," Thomas said suddenly. "For what?" "For today. For making my grandmother happy. For," he gestured helplessly, "for everything." Ashley looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his expression that made her chest tight with emotion. "Thomas, I know," he said quickly. "I know it was just part of the arrangement, but thank you anyway." He started to walk away, then paused. "You should know, what I said today, about taking care of you, I meant that. Whatever else happens between us, you'll always be safe with me." As he disappeared into the house, leaving Ashley alone in the garden with the scent of roses and the memory of his hands on her face, she realized with crystal clarity that she was in serious trouble. Because somewhere between the coffee lessons and the wedding vows, between the shared glances and stolen moments, she'd done the one thing she'd sworn she wouldn't do. She'd fallen in love with her fake husband. And judging by the way he'd kissed her, the way he'd looked at her during their dance, the careful tenderness in his voice when he promised to take care of her, she wasn't the only one whose feelings had become dangerously real. The question was, what were they going to do about it? Ashley woke up alone in Thomas's massive bed, still wearing yesterday's wedding dress, with the taste of champagne and regret coating her mouth. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in shades of gold that seemed to mock the hollow ache in her chest. She'd fallen asleep, waiting for him to come to bed. Their bed, as Loretta had insisted. But the other side remained pristine, untouched. Clearly, Thomas had spent the night elsewhere, probably in his office, buried in work and pretending yesterday hadn't happened. The wedding dress felt like a costume now, beautiful, but suffocating. Ashley struggled out of the elaborate gown, leaving it in a pool of silk and lace on the floor, something she'd never do normally, but nothing about this situation was normal. She found Thomas in the kitchen, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was staring at the coffee machine like it held the secrets of the universe, but his hands were shaking too badly to work the controls. "Let me," Ashley said softly, moving past him to start the machine. The scent of his cologne, now familiar and comforting, mixed with the smell of brewing coffee, and she had to grip the counter to steady herself. "You don't have to, Thomas." She turned to face him, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "It's just coffee." But they both knew it wasn't just coffee. It was the morning after their wedding, the morning after everything had changed, the morning after they'd both realized their carefully constructed walls had crumbled to dust. "About yesterday," Thomas began, then stopped, running his hands through his hair. The kiss, the dancing, all of it, was part of the performance. Ashley finished for him, even though the words tasted like ashes. "I know. No." The word came out sharper than intended. "That's just it. It wasn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Ashley poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. "Then what was it?" she whispered. Before Thomas could answer, Loretta's voice rang out from the foyer. "Bonjour, mes amoureux. I've brought croissants from that little place in the village." Ashley and Thomas sprang apart like guilty teenagers, both grabbing for their coffee cups and trying to look casual. When Loretta swept into the kitchen, her knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by their act. "Such a beautiful wedding," she sighed contentedly, settling herself at the breakfast bar. "Though I must say, you two look rather intense this morning." "Wedding night jitters." Ashley choked on her coffee while Thomas went perfectly still. "Something like that," he managed. "Ah, young love." Loretta's eyes twinkled with mischief. "So complicated, so frightening, but worth every moment of terror, non?" "Grand-mère," Thomas said carefully, "what are you really doing here? Can a grandmother not visit her newly married grandson?" Loretta's innocent expression didn't fool anyone. "Besides, I have news." Ashley's stomach dropped. "What kind of news?" "The kind that changes everything." Loretta pulled out her phone and showed them a gossip website with their wedding photo splashed across the front page. The headline read, "Billionaire's Secret Bride, Thomas Blackwood's Whirlwind Romance." "Oh God," Ashley breathed, reading the article over Loretta's shoulder. It was full of speculation about their fairy tale romance. complete with quotes from unnamed guests gushing about how completely devoted they seemed to each other. "This is good, oui?" Loretta said, but her eyes were sharp, watching their reactions carefully. "Everyone believes your love story now." Thomas was reading the article with an expression Ashley couldn't decipher. "This changes the timeline," he said finally. "We can't just disappear from public view for a year and then quietly divorce. People will be watching us now." "Watching us how?" "Social events, charity galas, business functions. We'll have to—" He paused, struggling with the words. "We'll have to act like newlyweds, in public, consistently." The implications hit Ashley like a physical blow. More touching, more pretending, more moments of dangerous intimacy while knowing it was all fake. Her heart couldn't take it. "I should go," she said abruptly, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "I have things to do today." "Ashley, wait." But she was already gone, fleeing to the safety of her dance studio across town, the one place that still felt like hers in this increasingly complicated web of lies and half-truths. The studio was exactly as she'd left it. Scarred wooden floors, mirrors along one wall, and the old sound system that required percussive maintenance to work properly. Ashley changed into her practice clothes and lost herself in movement, pouring all her confusion and longing into a fierce contemporary piece that left her gasping and sweat-soaked, but no less confused. She was in the middle of a particularly challenging sequence when she heard the door open behind her. "We need to talk." Thomas stood in the doorway, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit among the shabby chic chaos of her studio. But his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious about her form-fitting practice clothes and the way she was breathing hard from exertion. "How did you find me?" "Helena tracked your phone." At her expression, he added quickly, "For security purposes. You're a Blackwood now, officially. That comes with certain risks." "Right. Security." Ashley grabbed a towel and tried to ignore the way his gaze followed her movements. "What do you want, Thomas?" "I want to know why you ran." "I didn't run. I left. There's a difference." "Is there?" He stepped into the studio, and the space that had felt like freedom moments ago suddenly felt intimate, charged. "Because it looked a lot like running to me." Ashley turned to face him fully, and the raw honesty in his expression nearly broke her resolve. "What do you want me to say? That yesterday was real? That I felt something when we kissed, when we danced, when you promised to take care of me?" "Because I did, Thomas. I felt all of it, and it's terrifying." "Why is it terrifying?" "Because this isn't real." The words exploded out of her, months of suppressed emotion finally finding their voice. "Because you blackmailed me into this arrangement. Because you've made it clear from day one that I'm nothing more than a convenient solution to your problem. Because in 11 months you're going to divorce me and move on with your life like I never existed." Thomas flinched like she'd slapped him. "Is that really what you think? That you mean nothing to me? Don't you?" "No, Ashley, you don't." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "You terrify me because you're the opposite of nothing. You're everything I never knew I needed, and everything I'm afraid I don't deserve." The confession hung between them like a live wire. Ashley felt tears pricking her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Then why did you sleep in your office last night? Why did you avoid me this morning? Why do you keep pulling away every time we get close?" Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because the last time I let myself care about someone, really care, they used it against me. Because I've spent my entire life learning that love is just another word for leverage. Because I'm terrified that if I let myself fall for you completely, you'll realize what everyone else has. That Thomas Blackwood isn't worth the effort." Ashley's heart shattered at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Thomas, look at me." When his eyes met hers, she continued softly, "You are worth the effort. You are worth everything." For a moment, they stood frozen like that, her hands on his face, his eyes searching hers for the truth he was afraid to believe. Then, slowly, carefully, like she was something precious he might break, Thomas lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was different from their wedding kiss. This one was honest, desperate, full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "What happens now?" Ashley whispered. I don't know, Thomas admitted. I've never been here before. Neither have I. They stood there in her studio, surrounded by mirrors that reflected them back in infinite variations, real and unreal, truth and performance, love and fear all tangled together. We could try, Thomas said finally. For real this time. No contracts, no arrangements. Just us. Ashley's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. What about your grandmother? The timeline? The divorce? We'll figure it out. His hands came up to cover hers, still resting on his face. We'll figure all of it out. But first, I need you to know something. What? Yesterday, when I said I do, I meant it. Every word. The tears Ashley had been holding back finally spilled over. So did I. As Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, Ashley realized that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as the worst things. Sometimes love found you when you least expected it, in the most impossible circumstances, with the most unlikely person. And sometimes, just sometimes, fake could become the most real thing you'd ever known. 3 months later, Ashley stood in the hospital waiting room, her hands shaking as she clutched a cup of terrible coffee. Thomas sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them silent as they waited for news about Loretta's latest episode. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. The new treatment was working better than expected, buying them precious time. But today's emergency had reminded them all how fragile that time was. "She's asking for you both," the nurse said softly, appearing in the doorway. They found Loretta propped up in her hospital bed, looking smaller than usual, but with her eyes still bright and sharp. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite everything, because as she'd told the nurses, one does not meet one's maker looking unkempt. "There are my beautiful newlyweds," she said, her voice weaker than usual but still carrying that familiar warmth. "Come, sit. We need to talk." Ashley and Thomas exchanged glances. Over the past 3 months, they'd grown into their roles as a real couple with surprising ease. The morning coffee lessons had become cherished routines. The stolen glances had turned into lingering touches. The careful distance had dissolved into something warm and wonderful, and terrifyingly real. But they'd also been waiting for this conversation, dreading it. "Grand-mère," Thomas began, "you should rest." "Nonsense. I have something important to say, and given the circumstances, I'd prefer to say it while I still can." Loretta's eyes moved between them, and Ashley felt that familiar sensation of being seen through completely. "I know." The words hung in the air like a confession. "You know what?" Ashley asked carefully. "Everything, ma petite. I know this marriage began as a business arrangement. I know about your father's debt, about Thomas's need for a wife to secure his inheritance. I know it was all perfectly planned and orchestrated." Ashley felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Thomas had gone perfectly still. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "From the moment I walked into that penthouse and saw you two together." Loretta's smile was gentle but knowing. "You think I survived 92 years by being easily fooled? You were terrible actors, both of you. Far too careful, too scripted, too afraid of making mistakes." Ashley wanted to disappear into the floor. "We're sorry, we never meant to—" "To what? To fall in love despite yourselves?" Loretta's laugh was like silver bells. "Oh, mes chérie, you have nothing to apologize for. You gave an old woman the most beautiful gift possible, the chance to watch her grandson discover what real love looks like. But we lied to you," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "You lied to yourselves far longer than you lied to me." Loretta reached for both their hands. "Thomas, you convinced yourself you were incapable of love because your parents taught you that affection was conditional. And Ashley, you believed you weren't worthy of the kind of love you saw in fairy tales, because no one had ever fought for you before." Tears were streaming down Ashley's face now. "We wanted to tell you—" "When? When would have been the right time to break an old woman's heart by admitting her grandson's happiness was fabricated?" Loretta's voice was gentle but firm. "No, you did exactly what you should have done. You protected me while you figured out your own hearts." Thomas squeezed Ashley's hand tighter. "So what happens now? Now, you stop worrying about contracts and timelines and start focusing on what matters." Loretta's eyes sparkled with mischief, though I should mention, there never was an inheritance clause requiring marriage. "What?" Both Ashley and Thomas spoke in unison. "I may have embellished that particular detail when I spoke to my lawyer about your situation." Loretta looked thoroughly pleased with herself. David Richardson is an old friend who owed me a favor. When I realized what was happening, I thought you might need a little encouragement to see what was right in front of you. Ashley stared at her. You manipulated us? I prefer to think of it as strategic matchmaking. Loretta's grin was unrepentant. Besides, it worked, didn't it? Thomas was shaking his head in amazement. You orchestrated all of this? Not all of it. The debt was real. The blackmail was real. Your initial arrangement was entirely your own terrible idea. Loretta's expression grew serious. But once I saw the way you looked at each other, the way you fought so hard against something that was clearly meant to be, I decided to help fate along. So Thomas doesn't lose his inheritance if we divorce? Ashley asked. There is no inheritance clause, and there never was. Thomas's wealth is his own, earned through his brilliance and hard work. Loretta looked at her grandson with obvious pride. Though I suspect divorce is no longer a concern, Ashley and Thomas looked at each other, and she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Relief, love, and a future full of possibilities. No, Thomas said softly, his thumb stroking across Ashley's knuckles. Divorce is definitely not a concern. Bon. Loretta clapped her hands together with satisfaction. Then I have one more gift for you. She gestured to the bedside table, where an official-looking document waited. Ashley recognized the letterhead immediately. It was from Thomas's company. I took the liberty of having your father's debt officially forgiven, Loretta said. Not as part of any arrangement, but as a wedding gift from grandmother to granddaughter-in-law. Gerald Sinclair is a free man. Ashley burst into tears, happy tears this time, and buried her face in Thomas's shoulder. She felt his arms tighten around her, felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you, he said quietly to his grandmother, for everything. Love should never come with contracts, Loretta said firmly. It should be freely given and freely received. You two have learned that now. We have. Ashley managed through her tears. Good. Then I have one last request. Loretta's eyes grew serious. Leave, mes enfants. Love boldly. Laugh often. Dance in your kitchen every morning if it makes you happy. Don't waste time on regrets or fears. Promise me. We promise, they said together. 6 months later, Ashley stood in the same garden where they'd had their first wedding, watching as workmen hung lights in the trees for their second ceremony. This one real, honest, and attended only by the people they truly loved. Gerald Sinclair walked her down the aisle again, but this time he was beaming with genuine joy instead of worried confusion. Loretta sat in the front row, stronger than the doctors had predicted, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Better? Thomas asked, as they reached the altar, and Ashley laughed through happy tears. Much better. This time when they said, I do, there were no scripts, no contracts, no careful performances. There were only two people who had found each other in the most impossible circumstances and chosen to love each other through all the complications that followed. When Thomas kissed her, it was with the confidence of a man who knew he was kissing his wife. Not his fake wife, not his business arrangement, but the woman who had reorganized his entire life and filled it with laughter and love and the smell of coffee made properly. I love you, he whispered against her lips, and Ashley's heart soared. I love you too. As they danced to the same song as their first wedding, surrounded by family and friends who knew their whole complicated story and loved them anyway, Ashley marveled at how perfectly imperfect their love story had been. It started with blackmail and fake contracts, survived public scrutiny and family manipulation, and bloomed into something neither of them had believed possible. A love worth fighting for, worth choosing every day, worth building a lifetime on. What are you thinking about? Thomas asked, spinning her under the lights. Just all of it. How we got here, how impossible it seemed, how perfect it feels now. Any regrets? Ashley looked around at their gathered loved ones, at Loretta clapping enthusiastically from her wheelchair, at her father dancing badly with Helena, at the fairy lights and roses and the man holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Not a single one, she said, and meant it completely. Sometimes the best love stories started with the worst circumstances. Sometimes you had to fake it until you made it real. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone worth rewriting all your contracts for. Their first dance ended with applause and laughter, but Ashley and Thomas kept dancing long after the music stopped, lost in each other, and the promise of forever, After all, the best contracts were the ones written on the heart. 2 years later, Thomas Matthew Blackwood, if you don't stop reorganizing those baby clothes, I'm going to hide all your label makers. Ashley stood in the doorway of what would soon be their nursery, watching her husband fold tiny onesies with the same precision he once brought to corporate takeovers. At 7 months pregnant, she felt like she was smuggling a watermelon, but Thomas looked at her like she was carrying the most precious cargo in the universe, which, she supposed, she was. They need to be properly organized by size and season, Thomas said seriously, not looking up from his task. What if we can't find the right outfit in an emergency? What emergency could possibly require a specifically sized onesie? You never know. Ashley laughed, settling into the rocking chair that had been Gerald's gift to them, handmade in his workshop with infinite love and slightly crooked joints. You do realize babies don't actually care if their clothes are alphabetized, right? Our baby will appreciate organization, Thomas said with the confidence of a man who had never changed a diaper. It's genetic. From which parent exactly? Because I'm pretty sure my genes contribute to the leaving coffee cups in random places trait. Thomas finally looked up, and his expression melted into that soft smile he reserved just for her. From both of us. Organization from me. Passion from you. There'll probably be a dancer who keeps impeccable records. The sound of the coffee machine beeping downstairs interrupted their domestic bliss, followed by Loretta's voice calling out in French. Ashley and Thomas exchanged amused glances. She's early today, Ashley noted. She's excited about her great-grandchild, Thomas said, helping Ashley out of the chair with the careful attention he'd been showering on her since they'd announced the pregnancy. Though I'm pretty sure she's more excited about having someone new to spoil and manipulate. They found Loretta in the kitchen, having apparently let herself in with the key they'd given her, setting up what looked like a gourmet breakfast for 12 people. At 94, she was moving a bit slower than before, but her eyes were as sharp as ever, and the new treatments had given them far more time together than anyone had dared hope. "Bonjour, mes chéris," she called out cheerfully. "I brought fresh croissants in that jam you love, Ashley." "Grand-mère, you don't have to cook for us every morning," Thomas said, but he was already moving to help her with the heavy tray. "Nonsense. A pregnant woman needs proper nutrition, and we both know you would feed her nothing but coffee and whatever takeout Helena orders." Loretta settled herself at the breakfast bar with the air of someone planning to stay for several hours. "Besides, Gerald is coming by later to show Thomas how to install the crib properly." "I can install a crib," Thomas protested. "Can you?" Loretta's eyebrow arched in perfect skepticism. "Without calling in a team of contractors?" Ashley hid her smile behind her orange juice. Over the past 2 years, watching Thomas learn to be part of a real family, with all its chaos and unsolicited advice and people who loved him enough to mock his perfectionist tendencies, had been one of her greatest joys. "Where is Gerald this morning?" Ashley asked. "At the new studio, directing the installation of the mirrors." Loretta's eyes twinkled with pride. "He takes his role as assistant director of Ashley's academy very seriously." Ashley's heart swelled thinking about her dance academy. 3 locations now, with classes for everyone from toddlers to seniors. Gerald had, speaking of the academy, the Loretta Blackwood Memorial Scholarship, though Loretta had insisted they call it that, despite still being very much alive, because "I want to see my money do good while I can enjoy it," would provide free dance education for underprivileged children throughout the city. "It's perfect," Ashley whispered, looking at the official documents that would change so many young lives. "You're going to make me cry into my croissant," Loretta said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "Though I must say, naming scholarships after living people is highly irregular." "Most grandmothers are highly irregular," Thomas pointed out, earning himself a playful swat. The morning dissolved into the comfortable chaos that had become their routine. Gerald arriving with his toolbox and strong opinions about furniture assembly. Helena stopping by with papers for Thomas to sign and staying for coffee and gossip. Neighbors dropping off baby gifts and unsolicited parenting advice. Later, after their various family members had departed and they'd successfully installed the crib, with only minimal arguing about the instruction manual, Ashley and Thomas sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Ashley asked, her hand resting on her rounded belly, feeling their baby kick in response to Thomas's voice. "Every day," Thomas admitted, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I think about how terrified I was of everything. of feeling too much, of needing someone, of being vulnerable. And now I'm terrified of completely different things, like whether I'll be a good father, whether I'll know how to love this baby the way they deserve, whether I can teach them to be better than I was. Ashley turned to face him, seeing echoes of the man who'd once stood in a sterile office and tried to reduce love to contract terms. But this Thomas, the one who made her coffee every morning, who talked to her belly every night, who'd learned to dance badly but enthusiastically in their kitchen, this Thomas knew exactly how to love. "You're going to be an amazing father," she said softly. "You've already proven you know how to choose love over fear." We both did. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. From inside the house came the soft chiming of the grandfather clock that had belonged to Thomas's parents, a family heirloom he'd never displayed until Ashley asked about his childhood and helped him realize that honoring good memories didn't mean forgetting painful ones. "Thomas?" "Thank you." "For what?" Ashley smiled, thinking of all the ways her life had changed since that terrifying day in his office. "For blackmailing me into the best thing that ever happened to me." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and warm and completely unguarded. "You're welcome, though I think we can officially say that was the worst business decision I ever made. And the best personal one? Definitely the best personal one." As if on cue, their baby gave a particularly strong kick, making them both laugh. "I think someone agrees," Ashley said. "Smart kid. They're going to fit right into this family. This family." 2 years ago, Ashley never could have imagined being part of something so beautiful, so complicated, so perfectly imperfect. A family that included a reformed workaholic who still alphabetized everything but now did it with love. A meddling French grandmother who'd orchestrated their entire romance. A sweet father who'd found his purpose teaching tiny dancers. And soon, a baby who would grow up knowing exactly how much they were wanted. Not bad for a fake marriage that had turned into the most real thing in either of their lives. "I love you," Thomas said quietly, his hand joining hers on her belly. "I love you too." And somewhere in the house, Ashley could swear she heard the soft sound of Loretta humming a French lullaby, planning no doubt exactly how she was going to spoil her great-grandchild rotten. Some things, Ashley reflected with a smile, never changed, and thank goodness for that.